I was born on March 3rd, 1932. Guam is beautiful. I lived in an Arahan village and stayed there with my kids. I remember going to school. I played softball and a little bit of basketball. They liked me because I was so skinny and so fast. I remember our custom of helping people. When it is your turn to help, don't be afraid. I will never forget those who helped me out even for a sandwich. I remember making calamai, guzzeria, empanada, and ahu. I remember making coconut candy. You know, they melt the sugar first, then grate the nizuk. When the sugar melted, they mix it together. That was our candy in those days. I recall how sad I felt for the Chamorro people living in conditions of ruin. The people were very helpful and easy to make friends with. In most cases, there were areas that were out of bounds to us. It isolated us from going into the villages to really make friends of the masses. We did make close ties with the men and boys that came into our area so that they could help in many ways. It pleases me to know that I took part in the liberation of Guam in 1944. Today, I feel like I have helped to restore Guam to the rightful leaders. My life has not been a waste because of the liberation and my association with the people of Guam. I am pleased that Guam has rebuilt the areas that had been destroyed. I only wish that I could afford to return for a visit. My mom and dad were in their teens during the war. They married right after the island was retaken. My dad, Tata, relayed a story to me when he was with the Guam Combat Patrol. He helped the U.S. soldiers with the mop-up operations, rounding up the remaining Japanese stragglers. In one story, Tata told me that they were close to catching one very elusive straggler. They were so close that they found his camp with a fire going and rice still cooking. Apparently, the straggler must have sensed them coming. He left in such a hurry that he forgot his sword, Japan flag, and a silver dollar. When I asked him what had happened to the sword and flag, which would have been a great keepsake, Tata told me that he gave them away to the soldiers. When I asked why he did not keep them for himself, he looked at me and said that back then they wanted nothing that reminded them of the Japanese and what they had done to the people. I could not imagine the horror and atrocities that had befallen him, his family, and friends. But my father did say that he kept that silver dollar. I remember the sheer beauty of Guam, and being able to be there made for one of the best times of my life. To be able to live with those memories is a privilege. I have included all of these slides from Guam, plus the CD. You may be able to use some of the Andersen Air Force Base slides. I'm sure it has changed considerably. The slides are yours to use as you want. They are my gift to one of the most enjoyable and informative times of my life. I attended the elementary school in Sinanya, now C.L. Taitano Elementary, for grades K through 4th. My first grade teacher was Mrs. Castro, 3rd grade was Mrs. Bamba, 4th grade Mrs. Villagomez. They were some of the best teachers that taught there. They made learning fun. The classrooms were clean and cool. We had fans then. I remember bringing lots of books home to do homework. There was a store near the school, Tan Rosario's store. It was our breakfast and our lunch hangout. We'd buy bread pudding, cream puff, salty seed, sweet and sour seed, candy, Coke, Daigou, soup, pixie sticks, and gum. Some of us would go to Escuelam Pali, or Sunday prayer school. We'd walk to St. Jude Thaddeus School, now Bishop Baumgartner. There was a cool spot near Bishop. It was a great place to get cool pops. I remember during Typhoon Karen, my grandfather's house looked like it was breathing. So we packed everybody into the car and drove to the elementary school. We were sitting on top of each other. My cousin said, "Jeanette, we don't have to go to school tomorrow." I said, "Never mind school. I don't want to die." As we were driving away, I saw the house explode. You know how you throw a matchbox up in the air? The house blew away like that. I remember it was a nice day that day. It was very sunny and calm. I didn't hear the animals or the birds. The palm trees were not even swaying. While in the U.S. Navy, I received orders to Guam in September of 1967. I remember arriving at Andersen Air Force Base at about 9 o'clock at night, and in those days the road from Andersen to Finnegazen was pretty doggone dark. All of the stories I read over the years about World War II and the horrific battles there came alive, as strange smells and sounds assaulted my senses. I was driven there in a pickup truck, which gave the initial sense that things on the island were still a lot more primitive and unspoiled than they really were. Oh, and I have seen Tatamona, no lie, driving back to base one night from Inarajan in my Austin Healey 3000, a much prettier car that I bought from a Navy doctor. It was on the level part that goes through the jungle just before you get to the Talafalfo Bay corners that go downhill to the bay itself. I thought I saw somebody waving in my high-intensity driving lights, its protection against carabao. Thinking they were stranded or lost, I pulled over, but nobody was there. Then I looked into the jungle, smelling jasmine that was everywhere at once. I saw this pale, ghostly, whitish-blue figure waving me into the jungle. I turned out the car lights but left it running. The thing got closer and I got scared. I jumped in the car, turned on the sunlight, and drove like hell out of there. Later on, I told Sissy's parents. Her grandfather just shook his head in agreement. He took my hand and said, "Nothing bad will happen to you, Daly." He always called me by my last name. "The Tatamona has chosen you." And you know what? He was right. In spite of my second visit to Vietnam, I came home intact when so many others did not. I lived on Guam from January 1979 to May 1982. My dad was stationed at Naval Station. We lived in military housing surrounded by civilian housing. The Marine barracks was just a stone's throw away. Guam and the Navy are forever linked in my head. I attended New PD Elementary School in sundresses and flip-flops. I remember as well that creepy military cemetery across the street and the tropical jungle all around. I remember the long bus drive in which the bus driver would go out of his way to pick up students far up in the mountains, the high-walled jungle on one side, the sheer drop to the Pacific Ocean on the other. I remember Brownie Fun Day at Andersen Air Force Base. It seems as if the entire island's worth of Girl Scout brownies attended this event. Coconut trees grew in our front yard. My mom, several months pregnant, climbed up with a machete in her mouth because she had a craving for coconut. I remember pulling star apples fresh from a neighbor's tree. I thought real apples were weird and exotic. My mom was always surrounded by other Navy wives. The kids would come and go throughout each other's houses as if they lived there. I remember the countless outdoor barbecue parties, including one neighbor across the street who seemed to have one every day, and everyone was invited. I remember going with my family to Gap Gap Beach for weekend beach parties. I saw my first octopus there. I remember my father sneaking onto Gap Gap at night to do some night fishing. I woke up to see live fish and octopi in the kitchen sink. We made bookmarks, mats, and hats from palm leaves. I remember watching the sixth graders put together a real Chamorro hut in the schoolyard for Magellan's Day. Typhoon greetings! What amazing technology we live in. My brother, Duncan, sent me your info. Boy, was I delighted. I have so many fond memories of Guam, Mariana's island. Believe it or not, I am still, to this day, almost 50 years later, relating my Guam stories to whomever will bend an ear. I, indeed, had a most charmed childhood. We were a naval military family, and between 2 tours of duty in Hawaii, we were sent to Guam for 18 months in 1960. I had my 8th birthday there. I was taught by some of the best teachers. We went to PD school. Speaking of which, do you have in your cookbook the recipe for the PD school outrageous tuna fish sandwich circa 1960? It was a mere 15 cents in those days. When we first arrived, my 4 brothers and I took a hike into the jungle. One of them mentioned snakes. I found myself alone when they all tore off at the thought of snakes. We found an abandoned Japanese warplane, old toothbrushes, femurs, skulls, and Japanese yen. When we took the bones home and exclaimed in delight our precious find to our southern grandmother, she implored us to take the bones back to their resting place because they belonged to somebody's Asian mama. Most of my little friends were Guamanian. I remember one in particular, Julia Tahaji. She really almost looked Peruvian. The little girls were so poor back then and would come to school in tatters. We had huge jack tournaments at school. I do have to tell you I really dug the typhoons. We would go out in the middle of them, hang from a pole, and let the wind soar our little bodies through the air. What fun! Our house was solid cement. Yes, we had the heaters in the closets for the mildew. We would roller skate on the roof of the house. All the windows were louvered. I remember being at my family's favorite beach, USO. I remember going home, sitting in the back of my dad's truck, looking at the sunset and feeling the warm breeze. One of my favorite places in the world is the village I grew up in, Tamuning. Every time I visit Guam, the streets, the houses, and the people are still there. I remember my family preparing for a big feast, the men killing the pig and standing by the barbecue pit while the ladies were in the house cooking. I always look forward to the sunset and the cool breeze at night when I am on Guam. I remember spearfishing up north at Retidian Point. When I was in middle school, I used to walk the sand and follow the flashlights while Dad spearfished with his friends. Those days, it wasn't illegal to fish there. All you had to do was get a military sponsor. The fish were so huge back then, even the kitsu and sedzun were caught from 7 to 10 inches. After years of following my dad and his friends fishing, I finally got to do it myself after he retired his fins. He didn't know that I was using his equipment. Well, that's what I thought before. I'd spend the whole day out there learning the channel and the cuts and holes from Retidian to Scout Beach. The reef that way was amazing and dangerously tricky. In high school, I remember taking some of the football sharks guys out there to spear. In fact, my friend, a haole dude named Ben Whitaker, got into it. I couldn't go spearfishing one day, so I let him borrow my gear. I was worried because the water up there was extremely dangerous if you didn't know how the tide and the current. He went out at daytime and he came back about 7 p.m. I couldn't believe the size and amount he caught. I had a lot of good times up that way fishing with many of my friends. It would be nice if things were the way they were before. Most good fishing spots are preserved now. Spearfishing was life for me back in Guam, but it got harder to do. The last time I spearfished, I ended up in the back of a Guam police car. Ha ha! I never got my spear gun back. The officers at the station had a good lobster and fish dinner. Good times, good fishing, good memories.